talk a little bit about employee theft, fraud, and embezzlement. Now, 99% of the topics we talk about with small business, we are able to say we have personal experience. We've been there and done it. I want to be clear that is not the case with this topic.
No, we haven't stolen anything from anybody. But we do know that about 30% of all small business failures are due to employee theft and fraud. And that to us is just a frightening statistic that comes from the Small Business Administration and the Department of Commerce. But it went beyond that, because when we were doing research for our book, we learned a lot.
So, Crystal mentioned our book, Let Go to Grow, which is about the challenges that entrepreneurs face as their businesses grow from small one-person startups to robust mid-sized businesses. We went out and interviewed the owners of more than 100 small and mid-sized businesses. Folks were very generous with their time, and we're greatly appreciative of that.
Yes, and what we did was we asked them 10 questions. We asked everybody the same 10 questions. We did not ask a question about employee theft and fraud. And yet...
About 25% of the folks we talked to relate a story. We were absolutely astounded.
Yes, we were. So we thought we'd relay a couple of the stories to you today. The first one came to us from a small business here in the Richmond area. This guy owned a small service firm and had been in business, 10 years or so.
Yeah, about 10 years, and his office was located in the same strip mall as a pizza shop, and he was late for dinner again, and he thought he would try to endear himself to his wife by bringing a pizza home for dinner. So he went next door, he ordered the pizza, and they told him it'd be 20 minutes. He went back to his office, and he knew that if he went to his own office, he would get involved in something, and he would forget the pizza.
Yes, and so he sat down at the desk of his office manager, which was right up front in the office. And he was just kind of looking over the stacks of paper on the desk, and within a few minutes he just started going, something doesn't smell right here. And on his way out the door to get the pizza to take it home, he had picked up all the company's books and took them home with him.
And what he shared with us is that he didn't sleep that night. Yeah. Instead, he'd been poring over the company's books for the last several years. And by morning, he was absolutely convinced that this woman who he had trusted for years to handle all of his financial issues had been embezzling from him.
Right, and he confronted her. She said, yep, I did it. So he fired her.
And you'd think that'd be the end of the story.
Yeah.
Except things were kind of rough for him, because she did a lot of stuff that nobody else knew how to do. So several months later, he hired her back.
He did. He hired her back. I know everybody audible groan. Oh, how could he have done something like that? But he did. He hired her back. And then, she had promised to pay the money back to him, so she was doing that. Now she had a paycheck to do it with. And everything seemed to be going fine until she came to him and asked him for a loan one day.
And he says, loan? Well, why do you need a loan? And he starts pushing, and he starts pushing, and he starts pushing, and it turns out she confessed to embezzling from a youth sports organization where she was the treasurer.
Yes, so she had done it again. Big surprise. Okay, so he fired her again. That is the end of that story. The second story was this company down at the beach. And in this one, the CFO was on his Christmas holiday, so he was out of the office for over a week.
And the CEO was in. He was the only one in the office. Everybody else was out. But he got the mail, and he started sifting through the mail. And all of a sudden, he runs across a Discover bill, and he says, we don't have a Discover card.
Oh, yes, they did.
What on earth is this?
Yeah, they did have a Discover card, and the CFO had for years, this was one of his partners. The CFO had for years been paying a lot of his personal expenses with the company's Discover card, and then since he got to pay the bills, he was paying the Discover card. Not so fun. That one cost the company almost $600,000, is what they figured out when they went back over the records. You can imagine the CEO's whole Christmas vacation was just trash. These are the stories we heard from people. And then let's bring in our lovely Richmond Times-Dispatch.
It was great. We were in the middle of writing the book. In fact, we were on the chapter about doing background checks. And Polly opens up the Richmond Times-Dispatch one morning. We're sitting there having breakfast, and she says, oh my God. Oh, I don't believe this. And the headlines were screaming.
Yes, it said, twice convicted embezzler charged again.
Okay, let me make sure you got that. This was not twice charged embezzler. This was twice convicted embezzler. charged again.
Yeah, and this one woman took a small medical practice for more than $300,000. This stuff is out there. You think you trust people. Even if you are a sole proprietor and you are using an outside service to do your accounting, maybe you have a CPA. We heard another story of a woman, she came up to us and told us, we found out after my dad died that his long trusted CPA had been embezzling from the company for years and years and years. You have to have systems in place, and that's why we brought in some folks today to talk to you about that. Now, first of all, we've got Sharon.
We've got Sharon Dabney Wooldridge. She's the president and CEO of Clean Care. Sharon is an incredibly successful business person. She's been operating this business for more than 25 years, and she began when she was 7.
Yes, I think 7.5 years.
And it's an award-winning business. It employs more than 100 people. But the best thing about Sharon is that she is a really nice person.
Yes, and she's going to chat with us today a little bit. We also have 2 attorneys here today. We have Mark Columbell from Thompson McMullen, and Mark has been with them since 2003. He speaks on a lot of topics, including bank fraud, commercial, landlord-tenant matters, and the big one, consumer financial problems. And then we have Bert. And Bert is with us, Bert Music, from Thompson McMullen also. And Bert has an extra added bonus in that Bert was also not just an attorney, but used to be with the Secret Service. So he brings a whole nother flavor into it today. And Bert also has a lot of expertise in consumer financial services and bank fraud. So we're going to let them get up and tell their stories now to you, tell you a little bit about what you can do to help protect yourself from this thing that is just rampant in our small business community. So, thank you. I'm going to let you do this here. So, okay, so it's just the right click.
Yeah, make sure I don't.
There you go.
First off, I wanted to thank the Chamber. I wanted to thank Doug and Polly for having Bert and I here today. It's really a pleasure to get a chance to stand in front of a group of small business owners and companies to talk about this type of problem. The reason we're here is Bert and I work for a small business. Our law firm is about 30 attorneys, and we represent small and mid-sized businesses. We also represent a lot of the smaller banks. We represent a lot of community banks. And over the last couple of years, Bert and I, we have some contacts. We have some contacts at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Bert is formerly Secret Service, and I have some contacts with the FBI, and we developed this program. And the program we developed was we were going to put on a fraud program for the local community banks on how to reduce the risk of internal and external fraud. When we put on this program, we got to hear these stories from the U.S. attorneys and these agents who prosecuted these cases, and we saw a lot of things come to light. But one of the things that really got us thinking is how these banks, who are experts in guarding money, their job was to protect money, were finding themselves victims of internal fraud. And it got us thinking, if banks are having issues, the people who are in charge of protecting money are having issues with internal fraud, then this has got to be a real serious problem with small businesses. One of the things with small businesses that really drove it home for us is that small businesses may not have the internal checks and balances. They may not have some of the internal controls to sometimes guard yourself against some of the internal fraud risks. The other thing that came to our attention, and this was especially true, we work in a building that's 2 blocks down the street, and about 2.5 years ago, that building was owned by a gentleman named Justin French. Okay, and everyone knows how that story turned out. But what we saw, the real fallout from some of that, is that some of these small businesses, some of the small banks that were hit hard by that, aren't able to absorb that hit as easy as some of the bigger banks and the bigger companies. Some of those smaller banks, that kind of hit can really do some damage. I want to turn it over to Bert to talk about some of our checks, or some of our talking points today. But the first one is going to be what we call checks and balances. It's going to be a throwback to 8th grade government class. Okay, when we talk about our 3 branches of government and how they all have some oversight over the other one. Well, that's got to be true of your business as well. And that's one of the problems we see with some of these internal fraud problems. And you're going to hear from Sharon. Sharon is the owner of Clean Care, and she's the star of the show today, because she's going to come up and she's willing to share her story today about how her company didn't have the proper checks and balances. And it resulted in putting Sharon in a spot where she never thought she'd ever be. And that was with me in a federal courthouse testifying before a federal judge at a former employee sentencing hearing. Somewhere she never thought she would be. So we'll talk about checks and balances. The other thing we're going to talk about is don't ignore the red flags. Okay? No one knows your business better than you. If something feels off, it may be. And we're not here to make everyone paranoid. Bert and I, sometimes we finish up these discussions and, afterwards at the cocktail hour or whatever, someone always pulls us aside and says, "You guys just scared the heck out of us." Well, Doug and Polly, I think, took care of that already in the first 10 minutes in telling some of those stories. I mean, this is out there, and it's a major problem. Don't ignore the red flags. I turn the rest of the checks and balances over, or the rest of the comments over to Bert.
Well, again, thank you to Doug and Polly and the Chamber for having us. I first cut my teeth in the fraud world up in New York, where I was a special agent with the Secret Service, and probably had the best playground in the world for investigating financial crimes in New York City. We got a lot of great stuff. Secret Service investigates anything involving the money system. So I worked with primarily a lot of the large banks and mid-sized banks operating in the New York area. But inevitably, those investigations would lead to small businesses who were victims of various fraud schemes that we discovered through larger fraud schemes working with banks. But it's absolutely true that you expect the big financial institutions to be able to safeguard your money and to have proper processes and procedures to avoid or at least identify and mitigate the risk of fraud losses. But they're susceptible just like any other business. The bad guys will always find a way around the best rule or regulation, particularly when you're looking at insider fraud. And insider fraud is one of the most difficult types of fraud to discover, because typically the insider, being an insider, has knowledge of the institutional safeguards. And there are often ways they find, or they think they find, to work around them. As with any financial crime, though, you got a paper trail, and that's usually what catches people. Mark and I work for a small law firm downtown. Our bread and butter clients are small businesses. We have been representing small businesses who are victims of fraud schemes for years and years and years. Just this morning, one of my colleagues came in. We were standing around the coffee maker, and he's semi-retired. And I said, "Bob, what are you doing in today?" He said, "Well, one of my best clients is a small business, been a good client for 25 years. Found out on Friday his bookkeeper of 25 years has been embezzling from him." I said, "Well, that's kind of timely, Bob. I'm going to, Mark and I are going to talk on this stuff this afternoon. Can you give me some more details?" He said, "Sure." Well, his bookkeeper had a health problem. He was hospitalized for a couple of weeks, and they needed to find a temp to come in and pick up the load while she was out. And the temporary bookkeeper said, "I'm not sure what all these checks are doing being written to your bookkeeper, but it's a lot of money over the last couple of years." Sure enough, he went back, started looking through the books, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars here. And it's just devastating to small business. It's a successful small business, but most small businesses can't absorb losses like that. Although you kind of ask the next question, well, you haven't really missed that money all along, right? So clearly you're operating in the black. There was a law firm in town, this came out about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. One of the lawyers in the firm had been embezzling money for years and years. And the firm made so much money that they really didn't miss it. It's scary to think that they weren't missing $500,000 a year. But and the only reason it was discovered was because they had a summer intern come in to help close some files, and the intern noticed, hey, all these checks that are supposed to be here aren't here, or were never received. We started looking into it, and sure enough, they found that the lawyers invested a lot of money. That lawyer now, I think, is serving jail time. One of the common themes that we see with small businesses is kind of this reluctance to admit that you have a problem or acknowledge that you have a problem. So I refer to it as the ostrich defense. You just bury your head in the sand and and hope it goes away, which is not a good approach. This goes to Mark's comments here about being proactive and recognizing red flags and setting up checks and balances. You know, as a small business owner, nobody knows the business like you. So if you start to feel that in your gut that something might be wrong, it doesn't mean you should embark on a witch hunt. It just means, you know, don't ignore it. You know, maybe ask the next question, why do you get that feeling? Typically, what we see in the criminal on the criminal side of things is you'll have that one employee who's got total control over the checkbook, or two employees who have total control over the checkbook. They don't like taking days off. They work long hours. They work late at night. They come in early. You know, they seem like stellar employees. You know, how can you live without these people? Until you start to think about the pattern of what they're doing. Well, why do they not want to take a day off? You know, well, because they don't want somebody else looking at the books. They don't want someone else looking at the account and writing checks. They don't want somebody looking at the monthly statements. We had a client not long ago, professional practice, medical practice, call us and said, look, you know, bookkeeper got us. You know, we had no idea we had a problem until one of the doctors was in on a Saturday and opened a credit card bill, happened to be a Discover bill. Discover bill showed a balance of something like $80,000, and she said, you know, doggone it, our bookkeeper gave me a Discover bill and paid off every month, and you know, last month it showed a balance of $2,200, and I see where we paid it off. Well, the bookkeeper was actually manipulating the Discover bill and submitting a fake Discover bill to her employer. So they thought they had a $2,200 balance, and in reality they had an $80,000 balance. So that's a very uncomfortable position for any business owner to be in. You know, what are the things that you can do to minimize risk? Of course, listen to your gut. Follow the red flags. Checks and balances, Mark was talking about, you know, it's always advisable to have more than one person review or have check writing abilities, you know. If you have a small business and you have a bookkeeper with carte blanche to handle the financial affairs, well, maybe set up regular audits, at least annual audits, so somebody's looking at the books. It may not have to be your accountant, but you as the business owner, just go back in and review it, make sure everything adds up and makes sense. That'll cost you a lot of time, but it's not a big outlay in capital expenses. It's always a good idea, I think, for checks over certain dollar figures, and for your business, you can determine what that is, but to have a requirement that two people sign it. So you can't have your bookkeeper write him or herself a $50,000 check and it go unnoticed. As far as being proactive, the longer you wait, the less likely you are to recover money that's been stolen from you. That's the biggest thing we preach to the banks when Mark and I stand up and talk to the banking groups is, look, when you have a problem, you got to stop. First thing you got to do is stop the bleeding. You know, figure out what the cause is. If it's your bookkeeper, fire her or him, and don't rehire him or her.
Sound advice.
That's the obvious one. That's the obvious.
They pay us the big bucks.
Yeah, but that's not enough. That's a good first step, and that'll certainly protect you from any further, or should protect you from any further losses. If it turns out to be a bookkeeper, and I don't mean to pick on bookkeepers today, but it's just the easiest example. It could be, if you have a sales force, it could be manipulating expense receipts and things like that. So we're just picking on bookkeepers today for no good reason other than they're a good example. But you know, make sure you go to the bank and change the authorization cards on all your accounts. If your bookkeeper's fired but still has authorization to write checks and draw from your accounts, then you really haven't done much to stop the problem. Those are some of the easy mechanisms. The other...
No, what I would just chime in on, and I want to share another person so she can tell a story, but know your remedies. And going back to Doug and Polly's example about the firing and rehiring of that employee, and then they said that's the end of the story. Well, no, that doesn't have to be the end of the story. Okay, what you need to be aware of are what are your civil remedies and what are your criminal remedies. And we tell our clients what these remedies are, not so that they can be vindictive, but it's to protect themselves, protect their company, and also protect future companies sitting all around you. Okay, because what you're going to hear, and when Sharon comes up and tells you her story, one of the other themes, and what you've already heard today, you've heard twice convicted embezzler. you're going to hear from Sharon. She employed someone who she didn't realize previously stole from a former employee. She gets fired from Sharon and is now potentially under an investigation for doing the same thing to another person.
Third time's the charm.
Third time. So with that, I'd like, I'm sorry.
One more quick comment before you get to the real life example, but speed is your friend. If you want to recover assets, you need to just think about the person who's embezzling, tens of thousands of dollars a month or a lot of money over time. Quite often, that money is spent on tangible luxury items and things like that you may never recover. But if there's money sitting in a bank account and they've stolen $600,000 from you, there's $400,000 sitting in the bank account. It's good to get that right away. There are methods for your lawyer to go out and seize that money so that person can't then just spend it or put it under the mattress or whatnot. The other thing is the civil process and the criminal process can work simultaneously. So we, on a number of occasions, have had our clients come to us and say, look, here's my problem, here's the embezzlement. We say, great. My next phone call is to one of my buddies in federal law enforcement or local law enforcement and say, look, here's what we got. We want your help. This is what we know. This is what we're getting. Get that ball rolling. The criminal prosecution side of things, the wheels of justice do turn. They do turn very slowly, though. You're far more likely to recover assets by pursuing both tracks simultaneously.
Sharon, would you please come up? And I wanted to introduce everyone again to Sharon Woolridge of Clean Care. And I will tell you, the real benefit of this program is hearing from a business owner who's willing to share their experience and who has gone through something like this. And I just wanted Sharon, first of all, to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your company.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm glad you're here at such an occasion as this, but you need to know. And it's scary to know that 30%, as Todd was saying earlier, that, go out of business because of these types of activities, and that's kind of scary. They kind of gave me chills a little bit, but I was fortunate to rebound. So, but anyway, I am the president and CEO of the Clean Care team. We are a buildings maintenance custodial company. We've been in business going on 27 years now. We do government contracts, commercial contracts, residential cleaning, construction cleanup, the whole gambit, and pretty much over the United States if it's feasible for us to move in the area.
Yeah, you started this company from the ground up, correct?
Yes.
So when your company first started, were you handling everything, both working and administrative?
Yes.
Okay.
I was doing it all. I was wearing all the hats, and when I got my first government contract, I was ankle or elbow deep in a toilet, and I got a call from a government contractor saying, look, we need this type of documentation, da-da-da. That's when I realized, I said, hold it, I need to get an office and get some help.
So you got some help on the administrative side of things. What type of person would you hire to come in, and what would they do for your company?
Well, I wanted somebody who had kind of an all-around office manager background, specifically in bookkeeping, because I don't do that. I can, but that's not my thing. I wanted somebody who knew how to work my bookkeeping system.
And you've had a couple office managers before we ran into our problem office manager,
Yes,
correct?
I have. I've gone through the end.
Okay. And we had a problem employee, and we will call our problem employee just Karen for today. Tell us a little bit about Karen and when you hired her and why you hired her.
Okay, I hired Karen, I believe it was 2009, late 2009, November, from an agency, a permanent job, a placement agency, because I was looking for a bookkeeper. At that time, before I hired Karen, that year, I think she was my 5th bookkeeper that year. So I had gone through it. I know what I want, it just didn't work out. They don't work out, they had to go. So I felt fairly comfortable with Karen, I thought, because of his company who had placed her with us. And she came on in November of 2009, and I decided in January of 2010 that I would hire her as a permanent employee.
Now, did you personally check any of her references, or did you rely on the headhunter?
I relied on the headhunter. I asked them, they did not do that. I asked them, could they send me references for me, and they did. And I noticed it was kind of strange when I went to call these references that they were either her peers or someone had already, that was my first red flag. the principal of the company. You know, why her peers or some, one lady was a person that had no longer worked with the company, you know, so that was a red flag. I'm like, all right.
So when Karen comes on board, she comes on board, and what was her job title?
Office manager.
Okay, and what kind of responsibility? She had control of her payroll?
Yes, she payables, receivables, accounts receivables, payables, and payroll, yes.
Okay, and what kind of oversight did you have on payroll and things like that?
Well, at that time, when she first came, I had 2 individuals doing payroll, because that was part of my checks and balance. I do have some, but again, you learn to put more in place. I had 2 people processing payroll. One young lady would actually do the data entry and make sure all the time was right. And then once she determined that the time was right, by checking with the office manager to make sure all the time was right, then she would send it on to Karen and say, okay, it's ready to be processed. Karen didn't at that time have access, or part of her responsibility was not to go in and do anything with the employees. And then I had an HR manager too, who her job was to, any new employees, was to put them into the system. But because we lost a couple of significant contracts, I had to size down. So those 2 individuals I got rid of, and Karen had all of that.
And so briefly describe what Karen set up and how she kind of orchestrated this embezzlement from your company.
What she did was she went back from an employee that I previously had and gave, you know, her name just happened to be Karen too, and then she used her profile and gave her a different last name, I guess, to kind of throw us off. So she put her in payroll, and she would do her regular or bi-weekly payroll processing responsibilities. Then I would check the payroll. I would go in down and check, make sure, you know, everything was okay, but obviously I didn't check. Yeah, I did. I checked everything to make sure these were no ghost employees I had on my payroll. And then I said, okay, everything looks fine. I said, Karen, go ahead and process. And then she would go back into the payroll and make her changes.
And then what it turned out to be was we had phantom employee with a direct deposit into an account that was solely controlled by Karen.
Yes. Right? And then because I did direct deposit too, because that's how we, part of our policy is that employees have to have direct deposit. That made what she wanted to do even easier, because she didn't have to have a live check. You know, you have to have the ID to go and prove who you are and cash a check.
And so, how did we find out? How did we discover Karen's secret?
Well, I decided that I needed to do some restructuring in the company. And I called my good friend here, Polly, and said, Polly, it's time for me to do some restructuring, because of I've got rid of 2 individuals, I needed somebody. Karen was kind of pigeonholed. Her skills did not fit what I needed. So Polly and I got our heads together to create a new job description of what I needed now. And so we decided that we was going to let Karen go. And then I had said, should we give her notice or something? I said, absolutely not, you know. So we called Karen in, and we sat down and talked to Karen, and I let Polly, you know, she facilitated. She facilitated, and I was just there. So Polly went on and told her, you know, your services are no longer needed. So she just, you know, she said she was shocked, and you know, she got up, and then she proceeded to go and leave out of the room. And she turned around, she said, I need to talk to Sharon. I need to talk to Sharon. And so at first Polly said, okay.
We looked at each other.
And then Polly said, no, that's okay. No, you can't talk to her. Come on, let's go to the office and get your stuff. So Polly walked her to her office and got her stuff, and we escorted her out of the building. About 3 days later, the new operations manager came in, and we had to do this process called a certified payroll for government. We were doing construction projects with the government. It's called certified payroll. I was helping my new office manager to train her how to do certified payroll. So I said, well, first we've got to go get the last several weeks of payroll records. So I proceeded to go look for the payroll records. In the drawer, there were no payroll records, none. So So I said, well, maybe she put them somewhere. So I'm looking all over the office for payroll records. But just so happened the day we let her go was a payroll day. So she still had that final payroll on her desk. She didn't have a chance. Had we let her, she would have taken it.
But she was trying to take
Yeah.
papers left and right,
Yeah.
and I just said no.
So I'm like, but maybe I'm just, I know I'm getting older, and senility sets in. I maybe she's put them somewhere I couldn't find them. So I decided to call Karen and say, Karen, can you tell me where the payroll records are? Because I'm looking for them. Well, I called her. She didn't answer. I left a message and Karen, give me a call, but she never called me. So okay, so I sat down with Bunny and say, okay, Bunny, this is how we do certified payroll. So I started going through the names, and I saw this Karen Robles. This is a name that she had made up, and she was making $17 an hour. Now I know everybody, that type of money would make $17 an hour. So again, because I'm getting older, senility sets in. So I called my ops manager and a few of my supervisors. I said, do we have an individual by the name of Karen Robles? Can you no, I don't know anybody. So immediately I called my payroll processing company, which they are awesome. I called them, I talked to Maury, I said, Maury, I've got an issue here. Can you send me all records that you have on this Karen Robles? So Maury, within 15 minutes, I had my first report, and that report showed that this was in June. From January, the mid part of December to 1st of June, this Karen Robles had made $60,000.
I think she was the highest paid employee in the company.
At the rate she was going, she would make more money than I would have at the end of the year. Yes. So that's how I found, and then, that my CFO at that time, I called Linda, and Linda said, okay, well, Sharon, Linda was on it, because she's a forensic controller. So, she said, you need to call the FBI. She was right on it. I'm like, no, wait a minute. Let's think about this thing for a minute. So, I thought about it for a few days. And tell me when to stop.
No, I'm letting you wind you up and go. This is the start of the show. Yeah.
I called the city also, and I called FBI, but because typically, from my understanding, FBI typically don't take on cases less than $100,000. But when they did come by, the investigator came over to look at what I had so much evidence. It was what do you call it?
A slam dunk.
Yeah, it was a slam dunk case. He said, we're going to take this. It's just, he couldn't believe it because I had everything so well documented. So that's what happened, and we did that, and then I just waited until they went through and investigated. They called her in, and naturally, when they called her, she said she didn't know what they were talking about, and so forth and so on.
So a few months later, we found ourselves in federal court, right?
Yes.
And you had an opportunity to tell Judge Gibney your story, and
he even said, the judge said, I don't see how she orchestrated this well planned. He said, I'm not even smart enough to do this. I mean, she had just to do that. And then what made me feel bad too, two things is that she had stole somebody else's identity, their social security number. So this individual is going to show at the end of the year IRS making $60,000. Then she put, she had 12 dependents. So she was trying to get all the money back, And so I wanted to call that individual with that social security number to let them know, hey, this is what's happening. So if the IRS comes after you, you need to steer them this way. And then after a few days of thinking, I knew I wasn't going to get my money back. But the thing of it is, I did not want what happened to me to happen to somebody else. We worked too hard and too long for somebody just to come along and just do that.
And when you say that, what did we find out at the sentencing hearing about her prior employer?
Yes. Prior to her, the company that she was with prior to us, she had embezzled $75,000. And they didn't file charges, I guess, because they were kind of thinking like I was thinking initially. They just kind of, wanted to go away, just go away, And that's why, when I called her previous employer, that the principal principal or nobody direct report would give me, you know, their names because of that.
And we found out subsequently that she may be under investigation.
Yes, for another one, yes. And so, and she knew she was under investigation. You know, the FBI would be scared to death. You know, she went and got another job, and while we were in court, we found out that in another jurisdiction that she was being investigated for embezzling $14,000.
Yeah,
So
she got a job with a local accounting, bookkeeping firm here in the Richmond area, and took some of their clients.
And what kind of irritated me a little bit, and, you know, she wanted to apologize, turn around to me, and I'm sorry, you know, you're a Christian woman and all of that. But if you were so sorry when you stole that $14,000, why didn't you try to pay me back? You know, and she went on. You know, this was her. And then she went on a cruise. You know, found out she went on a cruise. And when she was working for me, you know, she bought a new car. But I didn't pay attention. Her husband worked, gainfully employed. Her daughter was wrecking cars, and they were buying cars. She came and even asked me could she have a raise? She wanted a raise.
I remember that.
Yeah, she wanted a raise. And these are some of the red flags. First the employer, and then she became agitated when I wanted to bring in the CFO, because part of my checks and balances and my best practices in my company, I wanted to have layers. I wanted to have like a bookkeeper, CFO, with my CPA, so you have those checks and balances. So when I had my, you know, the first woman I had on, that didn't work out because her schedule was so crazy. Then I found someone else to come on, and we were in a conference room, and we were sitting down talking to Linda, the one that was with us when all this happened, and she just got very agitated and said, I don't know why we're doing this. This is just a total waste of money and a waste of time. And I kind of looked at her, you know, wow, you know, but I kind of, again, shrugged that off. Then she insisted in a couple of staff meetings, she kind of brought up, at my last job, you know, I had control of all the checks. You know, I don't know why you keep your checks at home. I should have all the checks on. That's not going to happen, you know. Some things I listen to my employees and I give, you know, I'll compromise. And I told her flat out, that's not going to happen. You know, my checks stay at home in a safe, and I'll bring only a few to work, and then I'll log my checks in when I distribute them. And then the other thing is like, no vacation. She never took time off. You know, she was always, you know, she cried herself, and, you know, I'm always here for you. You know, you don't have to worry about that. Those were some of the things that.
One thing I'll chime in on real quick, and Bert's got a comment, but chiming in on the being proactive, the common theme we see in all these cases is when this embezzlement and internal fraud starts, it's just a toe in the water, right? It's just all right, it's going to be, you know, a couple $100 here. And then, you know, and then it's, you know, you sit down and you put both feet in the water and it's $1,000. And it gets progressively bolder to the point where it's reckless. Where it's, you think to yourself, how did this person not think they were going to get caught when you have a fake employee making the most money in the company? You know, it was greed. She just thought, and she used to tell, and she used to tell people that I didn't know what I was doing. She really didn't. She don't know what she's doing. She, you know, I don't know what she thought. You know, she thought that I was so naive to the bookkeeping because I don't like doing it, that I was that naive. So.
Bert, did you have I just have one comment. You heard Sharon mention a little bit earlier. She said, you know, she was reluctant to talk to the law enforcement folks. That is a common thread in almost every client who comes to us with an embezzlement situation. It's always, yes, I want my money back, but gosh, I don't know if I really want to have this person go to jail. He or she's worked for me for 15 years. I know their family. I know the kids. I know that, you know, I've been to the school play and all of this. And that's kind of, and we always counsel them and say, look, you know, that's your decision. You don't have to press charges. It's voluntary. Here's the civil things that civil remedies we can pursue for you. But, you know, if you decide to do it, you know, you're doing yourself and others a favor by pressing charges, because without that, you know, it's going to segue into Doug and Polly's segment here. That's how you prevent it from happening in the future.
And I felt bad, and I really felt bad, you know, because she had, you know, family, never, you know, never been in trouble because I did a background check, you know, but I mean, then I felt betrayed, you know, because I trusted her. I felt betrayed, so
Karen, you didn't share the address of Karen's current residence.
Yes, when we went to the trial in August, it was August 10th, you know, and she was standing before the judge, and the judge, you know, he did his thing and then told her, you know, how much time she was going to get. She's there for 18 months. Her attorney asked if she could please go and take care of her affairs, you know, and whatnot. Because the judge asked, he said, do you have any family members here, you know? And I guess that he knew what he was going to do, and her attorney answered for it and said, but no, she didn't want to bring, you know, care of her family members through any of this heartache or whatever. But when her attorney asked if she could do that, the judge said, no, she's going now. So they
She was remanded into custody. It was I think that's when it hit home for her. But her defense attorney shall remain nameless, but actually tried to make some kind of big way with the fact that the first employee didn't report it for criminal charges. He said, well, Judge, don't draw too many conclusions from that, because, you know, there's some promissory note that she entered into to pay back her previous employee that she stole from. And the judge, I think, you know, looked at that like, so, you know, her second bite of the apple here, you're going to want me to not hold it against her that her previous employee decided not to press charges. But it may have, if they had, it may have kept sharing.
And if they had and she'd been convicted, that would have come up on the background check.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the point.
Which is
That's the point.
Right. So now, you know, she can't. The judge said that she could no longer get a job in that position. I think it was actually like dealing with money, but they said that was going to be kind of hard.
That goes to the know your remedies, and what a judge can do, and what a federal judge did here. He was not going to prevent her from ever handling money, because what he realized was the only job that she's really going to be eligible for is going to be a cashier position, you know, or an hourly wage job. What he prohibited her from doing in the future was being in any kind of job where she had some fiduciary capacity over money, where she was charging payroll and things like that. So, you know.
And another practice that I do that you guys, if you're not already doing, you might want to think about it, your bank statements and your credit card statements and your checks, have them come to your house. Do not have them come to your business. Have them come to your house. And your P.O. box, if you can, you go to your P.O. box or have somebody else that's not associated with the receivables or payables going to the P.O. box.
And that's a good suggestion. You can also get duplicate copies sent. So you can ask your bank to send a copy of your statement to your office and to you.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon.
Okay, that was fabulous.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We're going to have questions in just a couple of minutes, so be thinking about things you want to ask.
So you have gotten some great tips on things you can do when you start to see problems in your company.
Right.
But what about before the person gets into your company? How can you keep the fox out of the hen house?
Right, because we deal, Doug and I deal a lot with recruiting, the hiring process, and unfortunately sometimes the termination process as part of things we do with our clients. And we have 4 really easy tips for you too. And the first one is conduct background checks. Now, I know that in Sharon's case,
Nothing would have turned up because the prior employer didn't file charges. Nevertheless, you want to conduct background checks, and there are several kinds of checks you can do: criminal checks, sex offender registry, driving records, whatever is appropriate to your business.
Right, and what people don't think about a lot of times is if you've got employees that are actually going to somebody's house, you know, HVAC guys, anybody who's doing repair work, anytime you'd be sending an employee to somebody's residence where they're going to be alone with your clients, you probably need to do all of those checks for your own due diligence. So that's the first thing. Don't skimp on them. They're not expensive. There are services out there that will run the federal checks and your state check, and they'll go back. It's not expensive to do. Just do it. And the second thing.
The second thing is check references. And it's absolutely important to check references. But one of the things we say is, look, most people are clever enough to give you the names of 3 folks that are going to say nice things about them. Right? If they're not that clever, you really don't want to hire them.
Anyway. You know, if their references, their first level references, give you kind of so-so answers, just, you know, walk away. That's a big red flag.
But what we found is talking to those first three is important and you ought to do it. But you need to get beyond that. You need to get to other people. So one of the questions we've learned to ask when we're speaking to someone is, well, who else worked closely with John that would know about their work habits? And you'll get some other names, some names that weren't submitted.
Right, and that's what you do. You follow the trail. And if you're still not sure, ask the next person. So, was there anybody else that worked in your department that, worked with John for a few months? Who was that? And go there.
Another of the things, Richmond's a small town.
Yes.
A lot of times the person that you're hiring will have worked at a place where you know somebody, or one of your employees knows somebody. So call that person up and say, hey, are you familiar with John? What do you know about his work habits? We also suggest that you ask very pointed questions. Because if you just say, what kind of employee was John? You're going to get oh, he was a good guy. But if you ask very specific questions like, how did John get along with his supervisor? Or, how was John's attendance record? You're much more likely to get candid answers.
Right. Now, make sure you do all the things you're supposed to do. You should get a waiver before you start doing any of this kind of checking on employees' backgrounds and so on. You need to do that. And if you don't know how, you can reach out. We can give you the basics on how to do that. The next thing is call former employers, but make sure you talk to the right people. You see what happened with Sharon in that they got references, but they got a former employee and one of her peers. Well, she did that the next time too, didn't she?
Yes, when she went to the next job, she made sure she got the HR manager which had already left.
Prior to any of this being discovered. So that next small accounting firm here in the Richmond area that hired her talked to a former HR person who didn't know anything about it, who was really at a peer level with her. And so if they should have been talking to the president of the firm. If you're dealing with smaller organizations, talk to the head honcho.
And if it's a larger organization, make sure you talk to the person's supervisor. If the person is not giving you the supervisor as a reference, that's actually a bit of a red flag. That's a person that you should want to speak to. One of the other things we'll tell you is, particularly if you don't know the company, look up the number yourself. Don't just dial the number that the employee gave you. There are services out there that will sell an employee a phone number, and they will have someone answer that phone number and be anybody the employee requests.
Yes.
And give any kind of reference that the employee requests that they give. That sounds bizarre, but it is absolutely out there. So you can think you're doing your due diligence, and you pick up the phone and call this number, and the person answers Acme Incorporated, and that's supposed to be the name of the company. May I speak to John Thompson? This is John. And it's completely fictitious. So we suggest look up with the internet. It's easy. Look up the phone number yourself. Don't dial the number that was given to you.
Yeah, don't dial the number on their reference list or on their application. Look it up yourself. Last check thing you should do is we say to check all important claims made by the candidate, including education, licenses, and so on.
And you might say, well, okay, they lied about a degree. Do you really want that kind of person working for you who's going to lie about a degree? And it happens all too often. If you aren't familiar with the school, now if somebody says they went to the University of Richmond, you've heard of the University of Richmond, you know it's accredited, that's not an issue. But if somebody says they went to North Montana State, now that sounds like a school, it might be a school, I have no idea if it's a school.
No, we just made that up.
But a school like that you don't know about, check and find out if it's accredited.
Yes, because there are plenty of diploma mills out there that will sell people a degree. And along with the degree, if they buy a really good diploma mill, along with that degree, you will get a phone number again that you as a prospective employer can call, and someone will answer it. North Montana State University.
Yes, let me check our records just a moment. You'll hear keys clicking and they'll come back and say, yes, John graduated in 1987 and he has a BS in chemistry.
And we'll even send you transcripts. Okay, it comes with the diploma mill. These places are very sophisticated, and some people who buy these degrees actually believe that they're getting a degree because they're getting the degree for life experience.
They get credit for life experience. And then, I mean, one of the famous things is the person will be interviewed and so on and so forth. Yes, based on your life experience, we can issue you a degree. You do have to write a paper though. So write us a 3-page paper, and we're going to give you a college degree. And of course, it doesn't matter what you put on the paper, because that's
it just
not
matters what you put on the check that
Right.
you send along with it. These places are out there. The way you smoke them out is if you don't know North Montana State, if that's the one we're using, you would look up one of the regional accrediting bodies. There are 6 of them. You can go online, you can look up that institution and find out if it's accredited or not. You just find which region handles that state. I guess that would be Montana.
I would guess.
Yes. So you just need to know what state this institution is supposed to be located.
Because if you hear that North Montana State University is in California, that is a big red flag.
That's a big red flag too. Okay, so you need to find out how to check things. I mean, do you want an HVAC guy that says he's licensed but really isn't? Do you want an RN who says she's licensed but really isn't? You know, we've got to do our due diligence. More than 50% of all resumes have a significant flaw.
Which is a nice way of saying they lied.
That either there is an outright lie on the resume, or there is something on the resume that is meant to mislead.
Yeah, so for example, we saw one that said, graduated from Harvard Business School.
Yes,
Now-
I personally smoked this one out.
Now,
That was a great one.
You see graduated from Harvard Business School. That is leading you to think that this person has an MBA.
Because that's the degree they have at Harvard Business School.
There are a couple of others, but that's the degree
That's the
that
main one.
95% of people, 99% of people, you can also get a DBA. But almost everybody gets an MBA. There's no bachelor's program there. So this person's leading you to think they've got an MBA from Harvard. Turns out what they did was attend a 2-week executive education course.
Yes, at Harvard. They did go to Harvard, and they graduated from the 2-week executive MBA class.
The executive education
Yeah.
program. The difference is that to get into the MBA program at Harvard is very competitive. It requires 2 years of very hard work. Not everybody that starts finishes, and graduating means something. To get into this executive education program, you had to have the wherewithal to write a check. And in order to graduate, you had to attend. So very, very different things. Be careful.